Buddy in it. No, come on. This is not big enough. There we go. Adam's Rib, double X.
Hello?
Reeser.
Hold on, let me mess with my audio for a second. Right now,
It seems to be working.
Oh yeah, it seems to be working. Okay, so I'm a big fan of the channel. I kind of felt bad. Well, not really felt bad. I was kind of mad that you actually don't really hate Nixon as much as I do. But I personally think between 1960 to up to the 80s until Ronald Reagan saved this country that we had the worst string of presidents. You probably disagree, but I'm one of the people who think that JFK was trash. LBJ, I actually think he's the the first or second greatest president ever, but it's trash that he actually didn't run for a second term, so he will always be tarnished. Nixon was trash. Ford was trash. Jimmy was trash. Ronald Reagan, for what he was, he is one of the best presidents. And I'll give you a couple of reasons, but I'm gonna let you talk right now.
Okay, well, I mean, I would like to revisit the idea you said when Reagan saved the country, but first of all, I guess I actually see the presidents of the 60s and 70s as mostly capable leaders. And I think if you had to compare them in terms of their abilities to what has come since, they actually look really good right now. Especially compared with the last couple presidents.
Hold on. You think that Nixon was a capable leader? This guy, his VP had to resign because he was corrupt. A lot of people in his administration did a lot of screwed up stuff. The guy was stupid enough in 1972, he was stupid enough to actually co-sign some of his people in his administration, break into the Watergate building, and actually steal some worthless documents when it turns out that he won 60% of the popular vote, 49 states, well, not counting D.C., of course. Right. He won 49 states. This guy had the biggest landslide in one of the biggest landslides in U.S. history.
Only the wasted landslide.
Yes, only actually it's the biggest gap in the popularity margin in U.S. history. But this guy, and I don't like it how people just like to whitewash Nixon and say he passed all these environmental acts. He did, but he's like Herbert Hoover. I mean, he passed all these environmental acts, but he didn't back them with any money.
To be fair, when it comes to Nixon, I'm more neutral on Nixon. Sean is the one who actually likes him. I feel like Nixon... Yeah, I would not have voted for the guy either time.
Yeah, I think that if you kind of don't think he's absolutely trash, that you're giving him too much credit, as a human being.
Well, I mean, as a human being, he was a bad person, but most presidents are. He's probably a little more sinister than most. But if he had been a president in this era, he would have been much more dangerous.
I think the era in which he was president, he was the most dangerous. He's the one who opened us. He's the one who opened us to China, where everything says Mac or Mike, made in China. That's thanks to Nixon. There's two people that's known in the West from China, Nixon and Elvis Presley. That's because he opened us to China and caused most of our manufacturing jobs to go there.
Also, Meryl Streep and Kobe Bryant are huge in China. But,
yeah.
Anyway, I mean, so, yeah, obviously, free trade with China has not worked out super well. I sort of chalk it up to some extent to unintended consequences, though, because Nixon's main goal was to separate China from the USSR, and then later on, the trade deals were made in the time of starting with Reagan is when those really started to become popularized. Then Clinton, of course, is the guy who actually gets NAFTA through, and also really gets the ball rolling on the China trade.
But NAFTA have to do, correct me if I'm wrong.
That's when the Democrats surrender on the issue of free trade, and both parties become 100% supportive of free trade.
Oh yeah, I'm neither a Democrat or a Republican. I think that all the like independent people should start like two parties to replace, or at least to have four main parties. Like, I think that we should have like the pass amendments party and the balanced budget party. Because parties these days need to have like a vague idea, a vague platform, because
opened up
like a bunch of independent people, like they vary like widely. So I think that if we could get all the little indies together, because I'm a person who believe in like, I don't believe in universal health care, but I do believe that pregnancy care should be free. I believe that anything that have to do with pregnancy should be free, because I'm a constitutional pro-life. I think Roe versus Wade, if it's revisited now, it would be ruled unconstitutional. We could talk about that, but we can talk about other things.
Yeah, I usually don't get into social issues because I'm pretty indifferent.
Yeah.
So
you want to talk about?
Earlier you said that you think Reagan, you said the two greatest presidents of the modern era are LBJ and Reagan. And I'm just curious as to why that's the case, because they're very, very different.
Well, Ronald Reagan first started out as a Democrat, and I kind of think that he was kind of like a LBJ type Democrat. You know how LBJ, like, he really pushed for social equality and civil rights. Reagan did that to an extent, but it was the 80s, so he didn't really have that much room. But Reagan, one thing I appreciate about Reagan is he's the president who passed the MLK Day. Like, he's the president who made that into like a federal law that states that MLK birthday is celebrated throughout the country. And it took about 20 years. I think like Arizona was the last state to like ratify it and actually have it statewide. But Ronald Reagan is the person that did that. Ronald Reagan also helped South Africa, because in '86 the Congress wanted to put financial penalties on South Africa, which was a really stupid idea, because South Africa during the Reagan-Bush era, it was falling apart under apartheid, and they was about to switch to a more nativist government. And Ronald Reagan saw that South Africa was about to switch and was about to fall apart, because communism, thanks to him, was falling apart. So South Africa couldn't really use that whole communism thing, because Nelson Mandela, bless his heart, but he was a true and blue communist. And even though I'm a commie hater, I will admit that they know how to appropriate like civil rights to win black people favor. Like, kind of like what the Democrats do, except they actually had some balls. Like, the Scottsboro Boys?
Not right offhand.
Oh, okay, well, maybe you can look this up, but like 12 boys were accused of like raping a white woman in like a train, and they were all sentenced to death. But then the Supreme Court heard the case and gave them all new trials, and then over like 2 decades, all of them were freed because the women lied. But that's the case, and it was covered and supported by the Communist Party of America. So even though I hate communism, I will admit that they do know how to appropriate civil rights, and I give them that. But back to Ronald Reagan. He not only during the Reagan-Bush term did communism fall apart, but thus apartheid fall apart during during the Reagan-Bush era.
Well, those are two separate, very different things, though.
Well, they're connected by the reason why apartheid could hold up into the international stage is that since, Nelson Mandela was a communist, they could say they're fighting communism by holding him down. But then since the USSR fell apart, they couldn't really point at communism as the boogeyman because communism was dead. Thanks to the USSR.
In 1986, though.
Well, in 1986, they were slowly switching to Nelson Mandela being free.
I mean, I think he was still in jail in 1986.
Yeah, I said they were slowly switching because in the early 80s they switched him into a. He used to be in jail on an island, but they switched him to a house. You know how some prisoners could actually be home arrest.
Right,
you ever heard of that?
Yeah.
House arrest, yeah. In the early 80s, he had a decade in house arrest where he could watch TV, read a newspaper. Now, everything was bugged, but they started treating him better as they planned to free him. And if some of the economic, stagnations that was passed by the Congress hit South Africa, it could have really made them go way conservative and actually slowed down the process of them giving the government to the native South African black.
I mean, I don't know about that. By the time that Nelson Mandela took power, I think Bush was already president by then.
Yeah, I said Reagan Bush.
Yeah. Well, so you're
Bush,
you're conflating the two of them together as one, or what's the?
Yeah, because Ronald Reagan picked Bush as his VP, and then Bush successfully used Ronald Reagan's legacy to become president. So I'm conflating both because without Reagan, you wouldn't have Bush, and vice versa.
Sure. Although, I mean, there were some differences between them once Bush got into office.
Yeah, Bush was stupid enough to say he wouldn't raise taxes. Ronald Reagan wasn't. Ronald Reagan raised taxes 11 times. But people don't talk about that. Ronald Reagan was pretty moderate.
He was very conservative rhetorically, but in practice, especially after the 1982 midterms, he was fairly pragmatic.
Yeah, the only reason why he got some of his policies passed was because of that shooting. He had balls of steel after that shooting. I think it was 83 after he got shot. They really got some sympathy towards the dude, and he got most of his policies passed. They went from a 60% tax rate to 37%. He passed immigration reform where he made 6 million illegal immigrants legal.
Yeah, the
which people don't talk about that. He passed some healthcare reform. Before Ronald Reagan, a hospital could kick you out if you needed ER service. But after him, no matter if you have insurance, the ER has to serve you. Before Ronald Reagan, if your leg was cut off and you didn't have any health care insurance, they would just kick your ass out.
Yeah,
people don't talk about that. People tend to overlook some of his accomplishments, but the guy actually did a lot during his service.
Although I would say his cutting of the top marginal tax rate was not an accomplishment, but...
Really?
I don't think so.
Well, it was an accomplishment
an accomplishment in terms of a good thing. I mean, it was an accomplishment in terms of he did something he set out to do, but...
Yeah. I mean, that's... For most presidents, if they do what they set out to actually do, that's an accomplishment in my book. Like,
yeah,
for
I mean,
them.
to be fair, someone like Bush, the Jr., had a lot of accomplishments in that sense, but I wouldn't say that he did much good.
Well, Bush Jr., he didn't have much to do. He wasn't really like that much of a scholar. I mean, he was given a balanced budget, a $7 billion surplus, so he didn't really have much room to actually be like super conservative. He was actually the anti-Clinton. He ruined the budget. He ruined the fucking budget after Bill Clinton successfully balanced the budget for like 4 years and had a surplus of like $700 billion dollars.
Yeah.
So, yeah, he kind of tanked that.
Yeah, well,
in
a couple of weeks, Sean and I plan on covering Reagan, and needless to say, if you thought that we were too kind to Nixon, you'll probably think that we're way too harsh on Reagan.
Yeah, I mean, it's popular to be harsh on Reagan. A lot of this have to do with, like, there's very little to say about the dude because he's kind of a vanilla brand type of person. So a lot of people have to go on myths. Reagan flooded the hood with drugs. Reagan traded arms for hostages, and then the FBI flooded the hood with drugs to give money to the Contras. I mean, a lot of this shit, Reagan was a racist, even though Jimmy Carter was the person who was like a racist. This guy literally said that. Wait a minute, you don't remember that 1976 quote where he said he didn't want ethnics coming into neighborhoods? He didn't want black invaders coming into neighborhoods.
Carter tried to play the race card a few times in that sense of appealing to racists, but if you really look at his administration as a whole, and also his life's work as a whole, I don't think he was a racist. If he was a racist, he mostly concealed it pretty well. I mean, he put more people of color into his cabinet and on the court than any president before him. And
I mean, he
did more for the black people than Reagan making MLK Day a thing, because that's just a symbol.
Well, it's more than just Reagan making MLK thing. That's just a major thing. But back to Carter, you can say that about Maddox. Like, you ever heard of Governor Maddox in Georgia?
Before Carter, yeah. He probably was a racist.
I mean, dude literally had more minorities in his cabinet than any other governor before him. But that still made him a racist. Just because you give people, minorities, token slots in your administration doesn't mean...
I think actually George Wallace, of all people, after he got shot and stopped running for president, he ran again and won in Alabama, and he actually managed to win the black vote.
Of course, he was in a wheelchair, and he was, like, very apologetic. Like, oh, yeah, that was, like, 20 years ago. I mean, I would have voted for George Wallace because that fucker's in a wheelchair. I mean, I felt bad for him.
Yeah, I don't know. I think there is some evidence, though, that he never actually changed his private views.
Of course. I mean... Even if George Wallace was probably never changed his private views, knowing that he actually has to take a tube up his penis every day because he physically can't relieve himself would make me so empathetic towards him that I would actually vote for the fucker. I mean...
Well, I guess I'm just sympathetic because I look at who would actually do a decent job. I'd be like, well... Yeah, he's gonna have physical pain whether he's governor or not. So what do you think about it, man?
It's Alabama, not New York. I mean, he doesn't have even with the revenue, he doesn't have that much room of improvement, if you ask me. Now, I mean, people say the same thing about Joe Biden. Joe Biden said a bunch of racist stuff, but just because he picked Kamala Harris, now it suddenly disappeared.
Well, I think Biden's more of just an arch opportunist, because in the 90s when he said what he said and also passed the crime bill and other things, that was the tough on crime era, where if you want to be a cool centrist Democrat who has a national standing, you do a bunch of conservative shit. So I don't think he really has any core commitments. I think he just kind of goes with the flow. That's why now he has much different rhetoric on those issues, at least on some of them.
No, I actually think that the terrorist, Joe Biden, is actually pretty racist, because he said a lot of messed up things. He said that poor kids are equal to white kids. He said that Barack Obama is the only articulate black person he's seen.
Well, I think the way he phrased it is when they asked him what he thought of Obama in 2008, he said he's very articulate and clean, which, is an inept answer, and that's why I'm still surprised he was able to be elected president, just based on how incompetent he is. If not for COVID-19, we would have no President Biden.
I mean, I think if it came down to like a orange racist or like a pale shocked racist, I would go with like Joe, simply because Trump didn't award like Ben Carson with the VP pick.
All right. Well, I thank you for your call.
Thank you.
Thank you. Down the line and get to everybody, but thank you for calling in. And
all right. Love you.